Lakeland Currents is sponsored by Nisswa Tax Service. Nisswa Tax Service offers tax preparation for individuals and businesses. Across from City Hall in Nisswa and on the web at nisswatax.com.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Lakeland Currents. Our topic today is a topic that's becoming pretty well known across the state, especially across the northern half of the state, I guess, and that is the potential for mining nickel and copper in Minnesota. And our purpose of our program today is to help inform you, the viewers, of some of the issues. Our panel isn't here to be pro or con necessarily, but to talk about the issues that are facing Minnesotans as they look at this important project coming down the road. And I'd like to also say that our guests that are here this evening are here because of the Rosenmeyer Center for Local and for State and Local Government. They're sponsoring a debate. It's a series of debates that this organization does in the Brainerd area every year. So welcome, folks, to the program, and I'd like to introduce you first. And to my immediate right is Dr. Donald Fosnacht. Is it Knock?
Fosnacht.
Fosnacht. And you said it stands for what?
Night before the fast.
Night before the fast.
Which is Mardi Gras.
Mardi Gras. That's pretty interesting. And Dr. Fosnacht is the director of the Center for Applied Research and Technology Development and the Natural Resources Research Institute at the University of Minnesota in Duluth. Are they two different groups there?
Well, we have actually we have three centers within the institute. I'm a director of one of them.
Okay, and so your background is in what?
Chemistry, mineral engineering, and metallurgy.
Okay, so this is right down your field.
Right.
Okay, and to his immediate right is George Hudak, who is a director of Minerals Division, associate director of the Precambrian Research Center, the Natural Resource Research Institute, also at the University of Minnesota at Duluth. Did I get that correct?
That's correct.
Very good. And then to his right is Kathryn Hoffman, who is a state attorney with the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. And Kathy, maybe you could just tell us what that is. I'm not familiar with that organization.
Sure. The Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy is a nonprofit that was founded in 1974. And it's an advocacy organization that employs attorneys, scientists, policy experts. And the organization is designed around being able to work within all three branches of government. So we have folks that are lobbyists that can work up at the legislature to improve or protect environmental laws. Our policy experts and lawyers can work with the administrative agencies to improve rulemaking or work on permits that are issued. And we do have attorneys who can rely on the courts for enforcement of environmental laws when necessary.
Now, I know this weekend, the past couple of days, there have been a series of statewide meetings going on, and I think that was to fulfill the requirement that the state must have public hearings on this kind of activity, and they've been really well attended. And I think, George, you said you've been at
I've been at all three.
Don, I don't know if you've
I've been to the Duluth.
Okay, and I think the most recent one had over 2,000 people at it.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
There's a tremendous amount of interest in what this is. And I guess we could start with you giving us a background of what it is that we're talking about. What are we looking at in terms of mining, and where are we talking about?
Okay. What we're talking about here are mineral deposits that are rich in copper, nickel, and platinum group elements, which are the metals palladium, platinum, and gold. And they reside in a rock body that we call the Duluth Complex. And the Duluth Complex extends kind of in a northeast-southwest zone, about the border of that is maybe 10 or 15 miles southwest of Ely. And it's the area where the mineralization occurs is along that western border with the older rocks that we find in the Ely area. And the mineralization there is related to a group of intrusive rocks, which essentially are the lava that formed underground that fed volcanoes associated with what we call the Mid-Continent Rift. And that happened about 1.1 billion years ago. And that mineralization is primarily sulfide minerals. There are also some oxide minerals which contain titanium. Specifically what the PolyMet and what we're talking about with some of these other projects is more related to the copper, nickel, platinum group elements. And the Duluth complex is an interesting body of rock because it formed as the continent was trying to split apart. And the ore deposits in this part of the world are some of the largest of their kind known on Earth. If we look in terms of things like copper, nickel, platinum, palladium, certainly what we know from the exploration that's been done, they're probably the largest untapped resources of these metals on Earth, and they rank within the top 5 for all of those metals in terms of contained metal.
Wow.
And the reason for that is an enormous amount of this underground lava, what we call magma, came up through the Earth, and it reacted with the rocks that are actually down in the Iron Range area, or that make up the Iron Range. And what happened was, these magmas are very rich in the copper, the nickel, the platinum, palladium group elements, and they came in contact with those rocks that host things like our iron formations on the Mesabi Range, which can in some places contain quite a bit of sulfur. And they assimilated that sulfur, and as a result, the chemical reaction that occurs, because these metals like to form minerals with copper, or with sulfur, we formed these copper sulfide deposits that we're considering mining now.
Have we ever mined these minerals in Minnesota before?
Not in Minnesota. In other places of the world, they've been mined extensively, but not in Minnesota.
Where would be something close by?
Probably the closest good example of that would be the Sudbury region, which is in northeastern Ontario. Sudbury is a very, very major producer of nickel and copper. There are other places, for example, in the Norilsk district, which is in the northern part of Russia. One of another major district that produces these types of things, and also South Africa, what we call the Bushveld complex.
Well, you're talking about some minerals that obviously are pretty valuable, high market value, I would say, for almost all of those. When you look at this particular area, how long has it been studied? How long have we known that these minerals are there?
We've probably known those minerals have been there since the late 40s or early 50s. That was when the first real discovery of these took place. And the history of the exploration in the Duluth complex is very similar to what we see in other belts throughout the world, which it's very cyclical, right? And so exploration kind of ramped up in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and then in the 70s slowed down because Minnesota really asked the initial question as to whether we want to mine sulfides in the 70s. And so the exploration kind of ramped down, and the Natural Resources Research Institute, which Don and I are involved in, as part of our goal for doing environment or economic development in an environmentally friendly way, we looked at this area, and we continued to do basic fundamental research related to the mineralogy, the economic geology aspects of it. And in the late 90s and early 2000s, when interest in these minerals came back to Minnesota, we had established a pretty good scientific baseline for the type of mineralization that was there, which then was important for further development. That was used extensively by companies that were exploring in the area.
I think another thing that also is a very important factor here is in the past, these are polymetallic sulfides, and that means you have different types of metals, as George is talking about, assembled together. And traditional recovery methods really are very difficult to use with this type of deposit. And so probably in the late 70s through current time, they were inventing hydrometallurgical techniques that avoided a smelting concept that they normally would use in going after the sulfides and the metal values associated with them.
So this area that's being looked at, is it privately and publicly owned, or who owns this property?
Well, that's a pretty complex thing. The way Minnesota has separated mineral and surface rights, you have a variety of ownership, ranging from federal ownership of the surface rights. For example, the Forest Service has some national forest land that is in play on EIS, if you'll take a look at that. But then you also have the private ownership of the mineral rights. And both the state, and for that matter, the university in this Duluth complex does have mineral rights still associated with, for example, the university land grant status. So there are some university properties, there are state properties, and private properties.
So if I were...
I do just want to add to
Sure.
that. The surface rights right now are entirely Forest Service at the mine site.
Forest Service?
Forest Service. They are
Right.
part of the Superior National Forest.
Oh, okay.
The National Forest, the Forest Service has a policy not to allow open pit mining on this type of land, and that's why, as Don mentioned, there's a land swap going on so that this will no longer be Forest Service land after it's exchanged. But that's important, I think, because that land right now does belong to the public. That's publicly owned land, and all of us have an interest in how it's used.
So if I'm a private landowner and I've got 200 acres, I would have the mineral rights off that
Not
land?
necessarily.
Not
You could have
necessarily?
severed mineral rights that might be owned by somebody else.
So that would sort of depend on how far back the abstract goes? And
You have to go back and look at the history associated with that particular parcel.
so how deep in the ground are we talking about these veins being?
Well,
It depends, again.
They're really, the mineralization really isn't veins. The mineralization varies from more massive concentrations of sulfide minerals to areas where the sulfide minerals are just kind of peppered in with the silicate minerals that make up the various rock types that are part of that Duluth complex. So it's really not veins, like, we're not talking about things that we'd see in the old West where the guys are chipping off veins, things like that. We're talking about extensive, broad sheets of mineralization that extend from the surface down to, the most recent drilling, I think probably several thousand feet at least we know of, and we anticipate, based on geologic models, that it will extend at depth even further.
Wow.
PolyMet in particular plans to mine between 600 and 700
That's
feet down.
PolyMet is?
PolyMet is the project that we're looking at right now. It's proposed, there's a environmental impact statement for PolyMet out for public comment right now. And there are several agencies involved in that. The State Department of Natural Resources, as well as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. Forest Service, all have a role there with that EIS. And this particular project has been under environmental review for some years now. This is their second draft. Their first draft was released in late 2009, and the comment period extended into 2010. That draft is not particularly well received, especially by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, who has authority over federal environmental review processes. And this one is federal because of the involvement of the Army Corps and now the Forest Service in this iteration. And the EPA was concerned about some of the long-term environmental implications of the mine, and they rank environmental impact statements 1, 2, or 3, and they give this one a 3 rating, which is the worst, and stated that the project should not proceed as planned because of the environmental impacts. They were concerned about the pit overflowing. So, the mining companies, they build a pit, and over time those pits fill up naturally because of groundwater and precipitation, and sometimes surface flow too from nearby lakes and rivers. In this case, it was mostly the groundwater and precipitation, and but there's a lot of constituents, pollutants that are exposed in those pit walls that the water comes in contact with, and so over time that pit was expected to overflow into nearby lakes and rivers, and that would be a violation of the Clean Water Act. That was one of EPA's concerns. Another one was that the environmental impact statement did not contain adequate information about financial assurance. Financial assurance is a sort of damage deposit that the mining companies are required to put down at the beginning of a project to pay for potential cleanup that has to happen either at the end of the project or sooner if the project closes suddenly, the company goes bankrupt, mineral prices drop, things like that happen. We're all very familiar with those types of things happening on the Iron Range. It's a scenario here as well. So the EPA had some concerns, and the company went back to the drawing board, and this is their new draft that's out for public comment right now.
How big of a geographic area are we talking?
Oh,
Roughly?
well, the actual, I think the 2 pits is about 921 acres, roughly a little square mile and a half of where the pits are located. Then there's an extended area where they have auxiliary features. They also have a brownfield site where they'll actually do the processing. It's the old it's the old LTV plant in Hoyt Lakes. And then they have a transportation corridor, which is an existing railroad, but they'd have to put a spur in. So I think that the separation between those, the plant location and the mine location, I remember, was it 6-7 miles, something like that?
7 miles.
Yeah, 7.
Yeah, and the pit depths, they actually have an east pit that they've planned, a central pit, and a west pit. The west pit goes down to, I think, 696 feet. The east pit is about 630 feet, and then they have this central pit area, which is going to be adjacent to the east pit, which is about 350 feet deep.
Wow.
So that's their plan of action.
Now, I suppose a lot of us drive by the Iron Range pits and we see those big, huge holes and they've all filled up. Is the mining different now than it was then? Or is there reclamation different? Would the landscape still have a big hole in it, or when they're done, would it be filled in? Or what do they do?
Their plan, as outlined in the EIS, basically is to backfill the east and central pits with material that they've taken out but they won't use, which is higher in sulfur content. So they actually backfill that pit with those type of materials and covered with low sulfur material, and actually create a wetland in the end with that side. And then the west pit will become a pit lake.
Is it the sulfur then that's the concern?
I think that's one of the concerns, probably just how much wetland might be impacted, overall when they're doing the activities. They want to make sure that when it's reclaimed that it's got a very good use, natural use for whatever animals and other things might be in that area, so they can take advantage of what's there. And then, of course, you have the concerns about, will any of this impact the Partridge or Embarrass rivers or the creeks that flood into those, and which eventually go into the St. Louis River.
Does it look like it would directly impact any of the lakes in the immediate area, or are they? I'm not real familiar with that area. Are there lakes close by?
Well, the Colby Lake is right downstream, and that's the drinking water source for the city of White Lakes. And they are predicting an increase in arsenic in that lake. Now, it will still be below the drinking water standard according to their predictions,
Right.
but they are looking at an increase in a potentially dangerous material. The issue for me is that, and I think for a lot of groups that are, and people that are watching this closely, is that once you have unearthed all of these materials, you've exposed a lot of surface area that has potentially reactive materials in it. So there is the potential for acidic conditions, but even without acidic conditions, you've exposed a lot of metals, copper, zinc, things like that, which are toxic to aquatic life. Some of them are potentially harmful to human life. And once you've exposed them, you can't put the genie back in the bottle, as it were. So the mining methods they use are conventional. I mean, they're not really much different than, or really any different than you would see at an iron mine. They blast, they excavate, they haul it out with trucks. And then it's sorted into, initially there's just two piles, if you think about it. There's the waste rock, which is the material that doesn't have enough metals in it to make it economic for them to recover. And then there's the ore, which they then send over to the plant site. Now, the waste rock they then sort again into 4 categories depending on the sulfur content. And the lowest sulfur content, which is about 70% of the rock, sits in a stockpile on the site. And that stockpile becomes a permanent feature of the site. They don't remove that, they don't put it into the pit, anything like that, it sits there. And the the more reactive rock goes back into the pit, into the east pit. And so what you have here is a stockpile and a mine pit. And once you've exposed the materials in there, you can't undo that. And so there's a potential for pollution for hundreds of years. And so PolyMet's strategy for dealing with this is to contain the water. So they've built some barriers around this big stockpile. They want to build a barrier around the tailings basin. And the idea is that you capture the water before it leaves. And I think there's no disagreement that that water carries pollutants. It's a question of, capturing it before it leaves the site so that it doesn't make it to the rivers or lakes. And if these structures only had to function for 20 years while the mine operated, these would probably be pretty good solutions to the problem. The concern that we have is that these barriers and the pumps and the wastewater treatment plants all have to operate for much longer than that. In fact, we know from the water modeling that PolyMet's done that their own predictions are that these facilities will have to operate for a minimum of 200 years at the mine site and a minimum of 500 years at the plant site. So you're talking about man-made engineered structures that have to have extraordinary longevity, and that's a concern.
Wow, that's really interesting. You talk about PolyMet, and I'm assuming that is one of the companies, or is that the only company that would be involved in the mining?
In this particular location.
That's the one that would be involved? And I have been reading a little bit about the meetings, and it seems like there's almost a split, and maybe none of you are here to give pros and cons about where people stand on this, but even in the area in Ely, it seems like there's people who are for it in the Ely area and people who are against it, and it seems like it's been pretty much 50-50. Who makes the final decision in this process?
Well, I think the final decision is going to come down to the Minnesota government as well as
the legislature?
I think it's more on the administrative side right now, and then of course the Corps of Engineers and the U.S. EPA.
When you say so, it's probably up to the governor.
Well, he's one of the key decision makers, but I'm sure that he's going to use his commissioners, MPC and DNR.
Sorry. There's quite a few permits that have to be obtained for this project.
That would have to be
So
obtained.
the company is, by law, cannot obtain permits before it's completed the environmental review process. And the reason for that is based on the reason that we have environmental review. The purpose of environmental review is to facilitate the planning of a project. So it's to look at all of the potential environmental impacts and maybe even more importantly, look at all the strategies that we have to try to mitigate or prevent those environmental impacts. And that way you can build a project from the ground up to include all of the potential, to include the best planning, the best, so that it's the least impactful that it could be on the environment, least likely to pollute. And some projects are going to pollute anyway, and we decide to go ahead with them, but we want to try to plan them as well as we can. And so that's the purpose of environmental review. And so until that project's complete, the company's not allowed to get permits because we haven't gone through that planning process and we don't really know what those permits should look like. The environmental review process informs what those permits should look like. Once they've completed it, they'll need over 20 permits, but some significant ones would be the permit to mine from the Department of Natural Resources, a Clean Water Act permit from the Pollution Control Agency, but the EPA has oversight authority and can heavily influence how that permit looks. The wetlands permit for destruction of the 912 acres of wetlands that they'll have to dig up as part of this project. That's from the Army Corps. And again, the EPA has significant oversight there as well. So those are some of the big ones. You can see there's quite a few agencies that play a decision-making role going forward.
And they get regulated according to what actually goes into the permit. So if they say they're going to do something, let's say on the water side, that's where it really comes. And they have the responsibility to fulfill that permit.
Does anybody have any kind of a wild estimate of the potential value of this?
In terms of there's billions of dollars of value in the minerals. Obviously, if you look at the whole Duluth complex, as George is talking about, I mean, it's a mineral district that will rival what we've done in the taconite industry.
Really?
Long term, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
Yeah, we're looking at probably a region of rock that's mineralized for somewhere between 15 and 25 miles, just off the top of my head, which is a fairly significant distance for.
Now you said there's platinum. Is there any gold in there?
Yeah, there's some gold.
There is gold in that.
Yes. That's the interesting thing. When you look at these things, as they deposited all the good chunk of the basement. I don't think there's too much zinc in this, but the copper nickel resource is certainly there, and then you have these precious metals, and it's the collection of all the values that really makes it an economic strong economic play.
Does anybody have predictions about how many jobs might be created in this endeavor?
Well, at that particular plant site, I think that's cited in the EIS as well. There's hundreds of construction jobs, and on a permanent basis, probably 400, 500 jobs, some on that order.
360 jobs.
360 jobs?
Yeah.
60 of those jobs come from what they refer to as phase 2, which is the construction of they call it the hydrometallurgical facility. It's an autoclave. It's a big oven.
It's a high pressure and very low temperature way to basically dissolve the minerals out of the ores that they bring in, and then they go through a series of chemical and other treatment steps to then concentrate the different metal values they want. They'll pull off the gold, precious metals. They'll pull off the copper. They'll pull off the nickel and cobalt. The cobalt's another one that's in here. Right now, their plan is to ship those concentrates off to some other people to process it. But if you look at this thing from a long-term perspective, certainly you could see copper being produced at a plant site.
And you're talking about titanium and other really...
Titanium that's a different type of oxide deposit. That one also, those are associated with the Duluth complex as well, but not at this site.
But that phase 2, the reason I brought it up is because some financial analysts are predicting that it won't go forward, that it won't prove financially viable at the site. So we're looking at between 300 and 360 direct jobs. And of those, the company has said in the EIS, at least half of those will be imported from out of state or out of country.
So they won't all be Minnesota jobs
That's
necessarily.
right.
Yeah,
I suppose they're high skilled.
Well, it depends upon the training that the people will need, certainly. But I think we do have a good core of people up on the range who know mining and mining activities. That's been there for a long time.
We're out of time, believe it or not. When do you see this decision coming? In the next, what period of time?
Oh, they got to assimilate all the different inputs. I don't know. What do you think after?
Well, after the public comment period closes, the organizations, the agencies have to sit down and respond to all the comments. I would not expect to see that until early 2015.
Well, we'll be following it closely, and thank you all for taking the time to come on our show. We appreciate it very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You've been watching Lakeland Currents, where we're talking about what you're talking about. I'm Ray Gildow. So long until next time.